Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. The soybean harvest season in America has always been a time of pride, relief, and reward for farmers across the heartland. Golden fields stretching endlessly under the autumn sun, combines roaring, families smiling. This is supposed to be the moment when months of hard work finally pay off. But this year, something feels off. Because even though the silos are full, the buyers are gone. And it all comes down to one man's tariffs, and one very strange, very controversial $20 billion bailout to a foreign nation that, ironically, just took away America's biggest customer. So grab your coffee, sit back, and let's unpack one of the most baffling economic stories of the year. Sumanda den starkest Brian, we Steinbrück, shower den, how? American farmers are paying the price for political theater and foreign diplomacy gone wrong. Under former President Donald Trump's aggressive trade policies, China, once the largest buyer of U.S. soybeans, has completely walked away. To put that in perspective, in 2024, soybeans were America's second largest agricultural export, worth nearly $25 billion. China alone used to buy more than half of that, around $12.6 billion worth of soybeans every year, but this year, zero. Not a single U.S. soybean shipment has gone to China. Instead, Beijing turned to an unexpected new supplier, Argentina. In late September, China purchased 7 million metric tons of soybeans from Argentina, roughly a quarter of Argentina's entire harvest, and it got those beans at a bargain price because Argentina temporarily suspended its export taxes just for this deal. The timing couldn't have been worse. American farmers were just finishing their harvests. Fields across Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska were overflowing with soy, but with no buyers, no market, and falling prices. So, what was Donald Trump doing while China sealed its deal with Buenos Aires? On September 23, Trump was in New York City, attending the United Nations General Assembly. There, he met with Argentina's President Javier Milei, a fellow populist leader and self-described anarcho-capitalist. Trump called Milei a fantastic leader and publicly offered his full support for Milei's re-election campaign in 2027. He even joked that Milei didn't need any bailout, that Argentina could fix itself. But just 24 hours later, everything changed. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent made a surprise announcement.
The United States stands ready to support Argentina, including a $20 billion currency swap line.
That's a fancy way of saying a $20 billion bailout, an infusion of US dollars into Argentina's central bank to prop up its collapsing currency. And where do those dollars come from? The American taxpayer. So, let's recap. Argentina sells soybeans to China, stealing the US market. Then, within a day, the United States gives Argentina a $20 billion bailout, with no conditions attached. You couldn't script irony better than that. Many U.S. farmers are furious, and they have every right to be, because this situation punishes them twice. First, they lost their biggest buyer when China retaliated against Trump's tariffs, and second, they now see their tax dollars going to support the very country that replaced them in the market. It's the political equivalent of getting slapped twice, once by Beijing and again by Washington. And here's where things get even more surreal. An Associated Press photographer at the UN actually snapped a photo of Treasury Secretary Bessent's phone screen during a meeting. On the screen was a message from Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rawlings reading, "Soy prices are dropping further because of this. This gives China more leverage on us." That one line says it all. America's bailout for Argentina, timed perfectly with China's soybean deal, is giving Beijing even more power in global trade negotiations. And this isn't just about soybeans. Since these tariff policies began, U.S. exports of beef, pork, almonds, cotton, and dairy have all been hit. The ripple effect is spreading across the entire rural economy. Farm bankruptcies have climbed to a 5-year high. Median farm income? Negative. Rural small businesses are closing down, one by one. Even though Congress approved a $42 billion emergency farm aid package, economists say it's little more than a band-aid. It's delaying, not preventing, a much deeper agricultural crisis. And here's the most telling part. The U.S. Department of Agriculture recently released a new export forecast. For the first time in decades, it projects a widening agricultural trade deficit. Meaning America will import more farm goods than it exports. That's not just an economic issue. That's a symbolic collapse of what used to be the world's most powerful agricultural empire. And interestingly, the USDA removed its usual commentary section from the report, the part that explains why exports are falling. Why? Because they didn't want to publicly admit the obvious truth: tariffs have gutted U.S. export demand. While American farmers are struggling to pay their bills, foreign competitors are celebrating. Brazil and Argentina have stepped in to fill the vacuum left by U.S. soybeans. They're signing long-term contracts with China and expanding their agricultural exports to record levels. The American Farm Bureau has warned repeatedly that if this continues, foreign buyers will permanently shift to lower-cost suppliers like Brazil and Argentina, and the U.S. might never regain those markets. Their solution is simple: new trade deals. But Washington, under both parties, has largely abandoned that path. The United States hasn't signed a major free trade agreement in over a decade. A decade without new markets, without tariff reductions, without progress. The head of the National Corn Growers Association put it bluntly: we're competing against countries that have trade deals with everyone, except us. Despite all of this economic pain, Trump's popularity in rural America remains remarkably strong. For many, it's not about economics, it's about ideology. They see Trump as the only leader who listens to them, who stands up to global elites, and who embodies the fight against Washington's bureaucracy. And that loyalty runs deep. But sooner or later, numbers speak louder than slogans. Because while the rhetoric promises to make America great again, the results show shrinking markets, rising bankruptcies, and an agricultural sector increasingly dependent on government subsidies. Here's where the irony hits hardest. The same administration that promised to put America first just gave a $20 billion lifeline to a foreign government, while U.S. farmers are drowning in debt. And what's that bailout really about? Analysts say it's less about soybeans and more about geopolitics. By propping up President Milei in Argentina, Washington is trying to counter China's growing influence in Latin America. In other words, American farmers are being sacrificed in a game of geopolitical chess, their livelihoods traded for strategic influence thousands of miles away. But geopolitics doesn't pay the bills, and no amount of America First rhetoric can disguise the painful reality that American agriculture is losing its footing. Fast. Let's call it what it is: a betrayal dressed up as patriotism. A policy that promised to rebuild American industry has instead left U.S. farmers trapped between falling prices, vanishing markets, and foreign bailouts that work against their interests. China wins. It gets cheap soybeans from Argentina. Argentina wins. It gets billions from Washington. And the American farmer? He's left standing alone in an empty field, wondering who's really fighting for him. It's a bitter harvest. So, one planted in the soil of short-term politics and reaped by those who play the global game better than we do. So what do you think? Should the U.S. be giving away $20 billion in aid to the same country that just replaced American farmers in the Chinese market? Or should that money have gone into rebuilding fair trade deals that actually help Americans here at home? If you're a farmer or if you have family in agriculture, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you see these tariffs as a necessary battle or a self-inflicted wound? Drop your comments below. I'll be reading and replying to as many as I can. And if you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with others who care about what's really happening behind the headlines. Because understanding the truth is the first step toward changing it. Thank you all for watching. Stay informed, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.